Good afternoon, everyone. This is Uday here, co-founder at Incubate Hub. Let's give a couple of minutes for people to join in. I really appreciate your time, coming over today afternoon for this exciting fireside, chat session, I would say. So, just before we begin, just to set some cadence, we would have this session for about 30 to 40 minutes, and anyone who may have any questions can either unmute or feel free to put your questions in the chat window, and myself or Pruth or Nacho would take up those questions. And today we don't have any kind of a presentation per se. It's more about a fireside chat, and we have very exciting speakers. So I'm really looking forward for uh, a nice session and a very participative approach from everyone. So maybe, Ruth, are we live? I think we can begin.
Yes, we are now live on all platforms.
Okay, fine. So we are good to go, right? I mean, we can begin. Okay, good afternoon to you. This is Uday here from Incubate Hub. Today we have a very exciting session, on what are the keys to successful digital transformation in consumer sales. And for this, we have a nice setup. It's going to be a fireside kind of a session, a chat session, and we have Anand Ramanathan, who's partner customer and marketing at Deloitte, and he has extensively researched around consumer sales, and has also written a lot around agri industry. What is the current state of digital transformation in consumer goods companies? What are the challenges at the ground level and adoption of the digital sales tools, ROI on investments in digital technologies. And along with him, we have Ramesh Srinivas, who is founder and CEO at worxogo. And his interests are around how behavioral science, like behavior science, can help overcome challenges in digital transformation. Also, how nudges can boost digital adoption and productivity of sales team of consumer goods. So as we see with these exciting topics, before that, what I would do is, I would like to really give a brief intro about the speakers today. Anand Ramanathan, as I said, is a partner, customer, and marketing at Deloitte. In this role, Anand assists clients in large technology-enabled business transformation projects. Anand brings along over 20 years of experience in helping clients grow across industries like FMCG, commerce, retail, electronics, etc. Most of his experience involves helping clients future-proof their businesses using tech-enabled large sales acceleration transformation programs. Anand is frequently covered by the press on consumer behavior and other aspects of consumption. In fact, you can find several of his thought leadership articles online. Previously, Anand was a partner strategy and operations at KPMG. Talking about our another speaker today, Ramesh Srinivas, who is founder and CEO of worxogo. And Ramesh is an industry expert with experience, advising big and small companies across the globe, including private equity and e-commerce ventures. He founded worxogo in 2015 to help enterprises unlock employee productivity using a winning combination of neuroeconomics, behavior design, and AI. That's so exciting. I mean, and I'm sure with AI almost proliferating in every aspects of our lives, now and in the near future, this is absolutely a very pertinent, I would say, interests Ramesh has, and I'm sure he has been contributing a lot. Ramesh has been integral to worxogo's growth, right? And today the company has developed its AI sales coach to over 70,000 employees, coaching these employees every day across 40 countries. So, with that brief intro, I would hand over to Anand. Anand and Ramesh, the floor is yours. Kindly take it forward.
Thanks for that. Thanks so much. And evening, everyone. Welcome. And I look forward to Anand first talking about his views on how is digital transformation impacting entire consumer sales industry. So we'll hear from Anand first, and then we'll all have an opportunity to ask Anand a lot of questions and kind of tap into his experience and expertise. And Anand's got vast experience in dealing with a wide variety of companies. So it'll be very interesting to hear his views on what's currently happening, what are the bottlenecks, what can be done to make it more successful for various companies. So I look forward to Anand's introductory talk on digital transformation of the consumer sector. All yours.
I think
Anand's dropped off.
Hello.
We just wait for him to come. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. We also have Maulik and Reshma.
Yeah. No, Anand's on again.
Rashmi,
so hi,
Rashmi.
Anand. Looking forward to listening to you talk about what's the state of the industry today.
Sure. So thank you first for having me on this call. What we have seen from a digital transformation standpoint is that the pandemic really focused a lot on bringing the customer directly in touch with the brand. And therefore, there was a lot of investment around direct to consumer. And on the back of that, we've seen category penetrations go up in many categories where consumers have started getting used to buying things online, right? And therefore, one big aspect around investments during this period has been in direct to consumer. The second big area where we believe that direct to consumer will make a difference is, when it comes to FMCG kind of products, which have a high frequency of purchase, unit level economics really don't get justified unless you have a subscription model in place to go direct to consumer. So what we are increasingly seeing is that because of the penetration of e-commerce, particularly in urban areas, direct to retail is becoming a big possibility, right? So, attracting and retaining stockists has become a challenge. And therefore, what you will see going forward is that a lot of learnings from direct to consumer gets transferred to direct to retailers, where brands will increasingly start dealing with the retailers on their own, because they have the big benefit of data from the retailers, which they can use to provide better service levels and improve both margin for the trade as well as improve their own service level to the trade, right? So that's the second area where we are seeing heightened activity. Beyond that, in B2B, we are seeing a lot of marketplace, right? This whole platform as a business model where vertically specialized platforms become relevant to reach out to your MSME customers as well as large enterprise customers is another area of digital intervention. Then remote sales, right? A lot of retail stores, when they were closed during this period, learned to sell online to consumers, right? So remote sales and managing the entire remote sales process and training your own salespeople to do it was another big area of investment. Beyond all of this, what we are also seeing is the enhanced use of data and analytics, right? Given that there are cloud platforms that are now being made available, it's all pay per usage, and it's all capex that traditionally was invested in data centers, etc., is now moving to looking at an opex kind of a model, and therefore the availability of data, the whole creation of data lakes where unstructured and structured data can be looked at seamlessly, has also helped in completely transforming the way data is used and consumed. And therefore, analytics as an area and the use of data science for predicting, modeling, forecasting, both consumption as well as the back end of the business is another big area of investment, right? So these are all different areas where we are seeing companies invest. But what is really important is it doesn't matter how large the firm is, or whether it's an Indian company or a multinational. From our efforts, what we have seen really succeed is when there's a strong business need for all the digital transformation and investments that are made. And therefore, it is critical to look at, firstly, very clearly articulating what we are going to be doing to the consumer. How is the consumer's journey going to improve? Who are our key customer personas? How is their experience going to change? And therefore, how are we going to impact human experience, right? Whether it is consumers, customers, suppliers, employees, digital is all about making a difference to the human experience. So I think that is really critical, because we've seen a whole host of people invest in technology. But what is the purpose behind that? How is it making a difference to the lives of your customers and your suppliers and other stakeholders is really critical to assess and establish before investing in technology. The other critical area we are seeing is that people are now a lot more open to make mistakes. So people are learning from, at least our clients are learning a lot from the whole agile ways of working, right? It's no longer a sequential way to work. How can we do things in parallel, fail fast, and learn from those mistakes? So that's the other big area where I think there's been a lot of progress during the past year or so, when the disruption really forced people to go digital. And lastly, I think it is very important to track adoption, right? The extent of change management, I think, and how you carry it and how you ensure that that ways of working change and people adopt to all this technology that is being invested in, right? So I think that's the other big area where there is increased focus to ensure that there is adoption of all the technology that is being introduced. So again, change management and incentivizing people to change, I think, is a critical area of focus for ensuring that digital really succeeds, right? So these are some of the areas where we've seen investments and some of the success factors that are driving digital transformation. So with that, I will pause and back to Ramesh.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. Thanks. Actually, that was very interesting what you said. I like what you said about saying it's I mean, if you invest in technology, it's to improve the human experience of all stakeholders. I mean, whether they are suppliers, vendors, customers, consumers, etc. I thought I'd ask you a few questions on one segment of stakeholders that many companies tell us is underserved to some extent as a result of all of this, right? Which is employees in companies. So even today, particularly in the Indian context, if you look at consumer product companies, if you look at pharma companies, they all still have fairly large field forces, because those field forces are complementary to directly reaching out to consumers. Because you've got, by the nature of the country, a wide distribution network. And so you need salespeople to go out, connect up with the entire distribution network, the chain of distributors, retailers, and so on, in order to do that. And the investment in those salespeople is very, very high, because it's a large number that you have. It's in a few thousands in many companies. And that's where companies have, particularly during the pandemic, thanks to remote working and so on, have had to look at saying, how can we make them more effective? And as a result, have kind of deployed a number of digital tools for many of them. What I wanted to get your inputs on and kind of pick your brains on is saying, in the last 2 years, I'd say most companies have invested heavily in going digital across, particularly with sales forces. To what extent do you think the sales field forces at a field level have actually utilized these tools effectively or adopted them? Have they done it, or is there still some way to go in that? And what are the bottlenecks? What's your view on what's happening?
Sure, Ramesh. So I think in the last few years, Salesforce automation and building up from that has been a big area of focus for a lot of companies, right? And I think by and large, it has made a big difference, because sales at the end of the day is very numbers driven. And a lot of the automation efforts helps in providing transparency, and it helps provide data to people so that they can act on it, right? So to that extent, I think it has made a phenomenal difference to the field forces, right? Otherwise, traditionally, you had people who used to travel a lot. They used to meet once every month in a journey cycle meeting. Right now, a lot of this has helped in improving real-time visibility, right? When you have an SFA and it's linked to a dealer management system, then you're able to understand how the market is behaving and where the salesperson is vis-a-vis his target, right? For any salesperson, obviously his target is like really critical, and this provides visibility on that, right? So I think that is a big enabler. And again, like I said, it is the adoption, right? Many times people will not want to adopt this level of transparency because it also exposes them to questions. And therefore, to that extent, you need to help the sales force internalize the benefits of some of these SFA initiatives, right? And any sales productivity tool will help if, for example, it's a function of the kind of person you are. If you are motivated by, if you're an intrinsically motivated person, you will look at your past sales and you will want to achieve that. If you're motivated by what your peers are doing, if there's visibility on what your peers are doing and you're able to compare and if you're able to show achievement vis-a-vis targets for your peer group, then you become that much more competitively driven, right? So depending on the background of the person, the levels of adoption typically vary. Right. So you need to understand what is it that motivates people and then get them to adopt the sales productivity tool so that the impact is seen. Right. But overall, has the market moved towards automation? Definitely, yes. Are they moving to remote ways of working? Definitely, yes. Is all of this automation help them achieve their numbers? Definitely, yes. Right. So I think it is a very useful element to enhancing field force productivity to have some level of Salesforce automation and productivity tools embedded.
Hey, thanks, Anand. I think that's useful. Yeah. So I remember a couple of years ago, we met the CEO of one of the Indian large consumer product companies. This was pre-pandemic, of course. And what he said was very interesting. He said, look, we have a large field force. We've invested heavily in a DMS, Salesforce automation, and so on. But he said it's only up to a point that you can give people data and information to do something. Beyond that, it requires a kind of a change in behavior, which also we have to focus on doing equally important. And he gave the example of all of us in terms of our personal fitness, right? He said, all of us do this resolution about exercising and diet, and we know what to do. So we have enough information, but do we do it? He said, look, most of us don't do it. And not because we don't know what to do, but because, like you said, right, we have to motivate ourselves to do it every day. And he said, salesperson's job is not very different. Every day you have to kind of get yourself motivated to do it. And so interestingly, he said, for me, one of the big differences will come about if I'm able to make a change in behavior of people. In behavior in terms of saying, can I as a salesperson effectively use everything I've been given? So he says, for us, whatever you call that change management, behavioral change, he says that's a big thing that we are able to inculcate. He believed that it would give a big competitive advantage for them as a company. So it's interesting that you say that. I mean, actually, our product looks at doing that through the concept of nudging. And so we say, you at a one person to person level, you can do it for 10, 15, 20. You can't do it for 5,000 people, right? And when it hits the hundreds and thousands, you have to do it digitally. So is there a way to digitally manage behavior change is what our product really does. And we found some very interesting patterns of behavior when you look at the track and monitor the digital behavior and analyze digital behavior of people. It's actually exactly like you said, Anand, that some salespeople are motivated by the desire to do better than they've done before, very self-motivated. So that's what their digital behavior indicates. Others are concerned about saying, what is my peer getting, what is somebody else getting, and so on. So the interesting thing is, therefore, that the same incentive structure will not work for everyone because different people get triggered by different things. So a lot of the analysis that we've done on that kind of shows this up. And that I find that very interesting in terms of what you're saying. That is, people are different, so the same tools will get used differently by different people. Now, having said that, at a ground level, right, what do you think can be done in terms of interventions to increase the effective utilization of a lot of the tools that are already there. Because if you look at apparently the world average for a salesperson is between 7 to 9 different digital tools that they're given. They're given an SFA, they're given a training tool, they're given a dashboard, sales analytics, and so on. So it's 7 to 9, which is a large number for anyone to use on a day-to-day basis. But in your experience, what have companies done well in order to lift up the utilization of some of these tools?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of areas, right? So the first is to incentivize adoption itself, right? Because a lot of times people are not even aware. If you look at most of these tools, the functionality that they have vis-a-vis what gets used, there's a big difference, right? And therefore, how can you get people to be aware of what is happening, right? Give them the right training. So I think there is a momentum that gets built up, right in the beginning, right? If something doesn't do too well in the beginning, it slowly tapers off, right? And therefore, getting it right in the beginning is really important. And therefore, to that extent, training, I think across the board, wherever I have worked with, the most successful implementations have been those where people have been made aware through proper training. And this includes not just the sales force of the brand, right? But also the extended sales force, the distributor sales force, for example. It's not easy. A lot of this has to happen in vernacular. It needs to happen in a lot of geographically dispersed spaces, right? So I think that is one big area. The second success factor is when you incentivize people, it's normally good to reward good behavior, right? And therefore, can you have incentives for everyone? When you are designing this itself, think of all the stakeholders and incentivize all of them to use this product and use this product to make them look good, right? And therefore, all the internal reporting, which is actually the third point in a sense, should happen through this tool. Many times we implement a tool and then it goes back to Excel when the reporting and the review and the feedback happens, right? So that is going to, you yourself are going to kill the usage of the tool if you promote Excel or some other external means of review and feedback, right? And therefore use the tool for all kinds of internal reviews. And lastly, what really helps is if you do pilots, what we have seen is that it's very difficult to get everything right the way you want it the very first time, right? So can you design smaller pieces and implement it, see success, fail, make mistakes, learn from that, and then go whole hog, right? Somewhere I believe that a lot of implementations really don't do the piloting right? They try for this ambitious full-scale rollout, which is high risk in a sense, right? And therefore, can you do many small pilots and then do the full-scale rollout? I think that can also make a big difference.
Thanks. That's interesting. Actually, it's interesting that you say fail fast, right? Or fail quickly, try something again. It also requires a mindset change for a company to say, I've spent money, it's wasted. I mean, it didn't work, and try something else. Now, over the past few years, at least 5-6 years ago, many companies were very reluctant to experiment because they said, I mean, we don't want to kind of blow money up, right, into something that might not succeed. But over the last 4-5 years, have you seen a change in mindset of large enterprises or companies where they are willing to say, I'm okay with some failure as long as other things succeed? Because it requires courage really to be able to say, I don't mind if 2 out of 5 fail as long as 3 succeed. But have you seen that change happening, Anand? And do you see a difference between larger multinationals, Indian companies, or any types of companies versus others, wherever you've dealt?
Yeah, so I mean, the change has happened, but it's a lot slower than one would want, right? Because I still think traditional ways of working are still prevalent, where people want to do things sequentially, and they again see all of this as a big investment, and therefore they are risk averse, right? And this whole agile mindset, working in small sprints, and understanding and succeeding and also failing, right, is something which is just percolating more than the size of the company. I think sector makes a big difference, right? So you have a sector like TMT, relatively, I mean, they're closer to technology, a lot of heightened market competition, very tactical in their orientation. They are willing to do this. But if I look at some of the more established sectors, right, if I take FMCG itself as an example, sector is, I mean, there are a few, exceptions, but by and large, risk aversion is far higher, right? So it's more a function of the sector that determines the willingness to adopt what I call a digital mindset. I think more than all the shiny objects of technology, what really makes a difference is the willingness to adopt and be open-minded to change, right? And that is something which is very, very difficult to find, because see, traditionally, if you look at how people are rewarded, also it is risky behavior is not rewarded, right? Failing is not rewarded. So I think some of this needs to go back to the drawing board in terms of how people are evaluated, right? And if there is an incentive for you to take the initiative and fail, then you will do it, right? And therefore, how do we build that right organization culture? How do we build the right metrics behind it? I think there's a lot of people-related aspects which really need to come together. And that is where the ones which have tried an agile digital way of working have really succeeded, right? Where the culture allows them to do it and where they are not judged very harshly. In fact, they're encouraged to fail fast, right? So I think that is the difference between people who have adopted a digital way of working vis-a-vis those that still function very traditionally.
Hey, thanks, Anand. There are some questions coming up from the participants, so I'll read out one or two of those. Then I have some others to ask you. Anuradha has asked a question that says, "What are the upcoming digital media which you believe will pick up, particularly platforms and digital media in the consumer industry?" That's her question. So, Anuradha, if you want, you can kind of add on to that question as Anand is answering as well. And others also feel free to put your questions in for Anand. You can put it in the chat as we are going in. Yeah.
Yeah. So Anuradha, you want to add anything or should I go? I can't hear you.
Continue, sir, please.
Yeah. Okay. So when I look at digital media and what can really, where we're seeing a lot of implementation happen, one is, of course, I mean, the large marketplaces are very, very important. If I look at a lot of categories now, highly dependent on the marketplaces, and therefore, in a marketplace, for you to be visible itself is a big task, because I mean, once you get a captive audience to look at your proposition, there will be some convergence, right? So I think one big area is to get that. And the problem is a lot of brands treat these marketplaces also like accounts, right? So like how you used to have large format accounts in the past, that's being extended to the marketplaces. But I think they require a very different approach, right? Where you need to partner with them much in advance, and you need to be in those 2 or 3 categories, right? Where they themselves, you want to be the top 2 or top 3 players, because beyond that, they are also not going to invest in growing your brand, right? And therefore, to that extent, very important to engage with them and have a conversation which is strategic, where you can be a top 3 player within the category. The second platform which can really, which shows a lot of promise is to look at any kind of vertically specialized platform, right? So what do I mean by that? When I look at, say, technical B2B kind of products, right? There are specialized vertical marketplaces which will help you sell, and particularly in areas like the government, because if you look at all kinds of consumption in B2B, about 40% of the consumption comes from government spending, right? And therefore, how do you make yourself available or aware in a context where there is government tendering, where there is going to be a set of competitors bidding together with you? And therefore, from a B2B standpoint, what we have seen is that while on the B2C side, you have the marketplaces, on the B2B, it is to look at vertical platforms and to sell effectively to customers through that, particularly the long tail of MSME, right? So that is, again, very, very important for especially things like durables, consumer electronics, etc., medical equipment, all of these different areas where there is B2B sales happening. Can you get onto the vertical marketplaces? Beyond that, social media will play a role. I mean, during this period, we saw a lot of people go and enable their product on WhatsApp, because that's going to be a far easier way to sell. And therefore, we did have some kind of investment going around WhatsApp marketing. So I think that's again an area which is relevant and which will see more products develop and more business accounts develop to enable sales through a medium like WhatsApp.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. Thanks. So another question that strikes is if you look at the last 2 years, this pandemic and hopefully the tail end now of what we went through, has that significantly enhanced the level of investment that companies are putting into digital as a whole in terms of technology?
Oh, definitely, Ramesh. I think, see, now increasingly when we talk business transformation, every aspect of it has technology has some role to play in that, right? So I think the agenda has moved away from the CIO to all parts of the business, right? Now, a CMO today needs to be really aware of what are the opportunities around marketing transformation that is digital. A sales head needs to be really clear about how he's going to use a sales command center or a cloud platform to make data available and real time make a difference to his customers. Similarly, the CEO is obviously going to look at both. Many of these business models themselves are predicated on digital business models, right? Whether it is D2C or looking at using some of these marketplaces to sell, right? And therefore, even from a top line growth standpoint or even a cost structure, right? You service that much better if you're digitized because your visibility of inventory across the system is going to be that much more robust if you invest in technology, right? So whether it's cost structure or top line growth itself, the CEO really can't take his eyes away from all the technology implementation that gets done, right? So I think technology has moved from a support function to a very core live requirement. And I think that has particularly accelerated in the past 3 years.
Okay, good. So Jayesh Kamli has a question, which I'll read out. It says, he's saying, hello, Anand. The implementation of DMS and SFA is good and, of course, ongoing. But how well is collected data being used for business insights across CPG clients? What percentage adoption is available? And is it more realistically adopted in developed countries versus others? That's Jayesh's question.
See, is it something that is being utilized effectively? We've just barely scratched the surface. I think a lot more can be done. It's not just the amount of data that you collect, but how well you use it, right? And therefore, I don't think CPG clients are still making full use of it, right? While they might be, for example, looking at, if I were to look at simple things, right? In terms of decentralizing some of your promotion spends. It can happen so much more effectively when you have visibility of what really sells at a local level, right? Now, how many companies really look at decentralizing some of this decision making based on data that comes out of the SFA or the DMS? Very few, right? Similarly, if we were to look at the bit about developed countries versus developing countries, sometimes I believe that the SFA DMS, and maybe our India situation is very specific, right? The extent of general trade that we have may not exist in other parts of the world, but we have some of the most robust SFA and DMS implementations that have happened anywhere, right? Given the level of fragmentation and the extent of general trade that we have. And therefore, is it better than some developed countries? It may be, right? Some of our channel and sales practices are a lot more evolved, right? Unilever 50 years back had the entire infrastructure to go into rural India, right? Now, you might not have that kind of robust infrastructure when you're dealing with modern trade elsewhere. So to that extent, I definitely think that Salesforce and Salesforce automation and dealer management systems have made a big difference to the country, but a long way to go before really using all of those insights up to the potential.
Okay, great. So actually, Jayesh, thanks you for that answer also. So Gaurav has another question. What to you is the biggest deterrent in becoming a digitally transformed organization? And an addendum to that is, what should be the North Star in terms of vision for digital transformation? Thanks, Gaurav.
Sure. So nice question. I'll take the first bit, which is the biggest deterrent. I think it is willingness from the top, right? I think a lot of this has to be pushed from the CXOs and the board in terms of allowing people to experiment, allowing them to fail, allowing them to be agile, and also very clearly tracking outcomes to spend, right? Somewhere, while everybody thinks it's very intuitive, it doesn't happen with a level of rigor that it needs to happen, right? So have you defined what you're going to achieve from the technology investments, and define few of them? Don't define too many, right? Define a few and then hold everybody accountable to those, right? So I think that is the biggest deterrent, because it doesn't happen in a structured way, especially in long implementation kind of projects. And what should be the North Star in terms of vision for digital transformation? I mentioned that before, right? Human experience. Doesn't matter whether it's a customer, supplier, consumer, or any other stakeholder, right? Is your digital transformation going to impact someone, right? Is it going to impact a human, and is going to improve his experience, right? I think that is the North Star. And if that is enabled, everything else will fall in place.
Okay, yeah, that's a nice way to put that. Yeah. So another question that comes up is, one is, of course, we're talking about companies putting in a lot of investment and so on. But one difficulty that's always been there with many of these initiatives is being able to quantify the ROI that you get out of it. Right? And to what extent are and earlier at least, companies used to be very particular about saying, if I invest X, what is my return I'm going to get on that? I mean, can you quantify it? Am I reasonably assured? And so on. Do you find it's still the same mindset, or are companies saying, anyway, we are going to get a certain return, but inherently we are willing to wait for a period before that return comes in? So what are the models that are being adopted now, Anand, to kind of track what ROI do you get out of a spend? Because some of this is a significant spend for companies.
Right. So there's a distinct difference, right? Companies which have to quarter on quarter deliver to a stock market will want you to quantify the ROI, right? They will want you. So for example, I mean, simple things, right? Somebody came to us and said, grow our same store sales from 8% to 15%. Now, it obviously had to be quantified into footfall, conversion, bill value, right? And the impact needed to be tracked, right, during the implementation. So this is primarily from a short-term lens, a quarterly lens, and a lot of CEOs are held accountable to that. But somewhere I've seen that promoter-driven companies are a lot more willing to be a little subjective about the benefits, right? They're willing to push allocation of resources if they believe that it's going to make a big difference, and not really look at ROI in every spend that they do, right? So this is a distinction which I have seen, but by and large, I still think the mindset is to very clearly establish ROI and to track, at least try to track. See, the difference is a lot of them want to track, but somewhere during execution, it just, doesn't happen very effectively.
Oh, that's very interesting that you're saying that, companies that are more kind of promoter driven are more open to saying we'll try to. So let me ask another question, and that is based on your experience. There are a lot of, if you want to call it, new age companies that are there, right? Many of the marketplaces are relatively new age companies. A lot of the what used to be called e-com companies are new age. Do you see a big difference in the way they approach things in terms of failing quickly, failing fast, versus the more traditional, older kind of companies? Is there a difference between these two in any way, Anand?
So I would look at it more in terms of where funding is available and where people are willing to, acquire customers at all costs, right? I mean, where there is funding for customer acquisition, definitely the risk quotient and the ability to take risks is a lot higher, right? So that is where we've seen companies really want to approach this entire agile and digital mindset and all of that. Where traditional companies which are still held accountable to the bottom line, right? And where they do not have access to funding from a lot of external agencies, right? There it is still a very conservative approach, right? And to that extent, they will want to see the benefits of all the implementation that they're doing, and they're not willing to take risks in failing very quickly, right? So I think that is the dichotomy. But yeah, given that a large number of startups anyway have access to funds, and there is a foreign capital which is being infused into these companies, definitely their appetite is a lot more to take risk.
Okay, so basically you're saying somebody else's money versus your own money. Difference in how you spend these.
Yeah, and it's also the valuation story, right? In terms of future valuation versus current performance.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. So one of the other things I also wanted to kind of pick your brains on, and okay, Maulik has a question, so I'll quickly ask that before I get into something else. So Maulik actually has a concern, and he says, if you have a tech-driven intervention, right, and some way you're tracking how people are reacting, so it's also behavioral intervention, isn't it an additional burden to the end user? Meaning, Will it be taken in the right sense, or will they say, is it a big brother monitoring me even more? So the more tech you give in the hands of people, even you mentioned that you kind of alluded to it earlier as well, right? Saying more transparency is more, you get exposed a little bit more. You referred to that. So is that something that also acts as a bit of a deterrent or a roadblock in terms of accepting, embracing, and running with the various digital tech that's been put in place?
So not really. I think technology is omnipresent these days, and uh, people are willing. See, it's also a function of how well you're doing, right? Irrespective of whether it's technologically enabled or not. If you have poor reflection of your performance being shown to you, then you might not like it much, right? So it's more a function of how well and how quickly you've adopted. And the early adopters will continue to use it more and more. And over a period of time, it also has to be seen as culturally appropriate for you to use this, right? And therefore, the organization will have more and more people adopt into it, right? So I think technology is a very transparent way to track many of these metrics, and it should be increasingly used. And people who are uncomfortable with it will also be uncomfortable, even if it's a non-tech way of monitoring, right? They typically are uncomfortable with the fact that they've got to deal with and face the lack of performance, right? So it has nothing to do with technology. I think it's just a medium. And I think technology makes it easier to monitor and track, right? So from what I have seen, it is extremely good to quantify and show metrics and show it on an ongoing basis so that it's not a surprise at the end. And therefore, to that extent, I think technology enables all of this.
Okay, great. Thanks. Anyone else has any other questions? Any of the participants, feel free to put any questions.
Yeah, so I mean, Ramesh just and Anand, just to add to what Maulik had asked, I mean, do you think you find resistance among the users of the app, asking the workforce to install and then giving a nudge may seem to them as policing or adult supervision? Do you think that is something which?
So it is bound to happen, right? I still remember an example. This was way back where the attendance system was also put on the toilet, right? The washroom. And there was enormous objection to it, right? Because people were asking whether that's also getting monitored, right? And it led to a lot of negativity around the new system that was introduced, right? So this was way back, right? When you didn't have all of this. So there will always be this mindset. But see, just like we are open, this pandemic has changed a lot of things, right? With work from home, people are willing to give you the space as long as you're delivering the results. Doesn't matter. You don't have to come to office. You can do work from wherever, right? So with that mindset, it becomes a lot more conducive to use technology to monitor things, right? Because you're not there physically and face to face. So I think people by and large understand that, right? And while there might be resistance in pockets, overall, I still think that the willingness to use technology because of its sheer penetration is that much higher now. And hence, I don't think this should be a reason for not implementing technology.
Thanks.
So Rashmi has a question, Anand. What are your thoughts on using behavior-driven interventions? Does it show any promise in your view in terms of delivering any benefits?
Oh, of course. It makes a big difference, right? Because, we mentioned this in the beginning of this conversation. Not everyone is programmed the same way, right? And therefore, for you to, you've got to do whatever it takes to, whatever works, right? To get something implemented or adopted. So behavior science definitely helps identify what are the different kinds of triggers or motivators. And then accordingly, your system can nudge and give people the encouragement to behave in a way which gratifies them, right? So to that extent, I think it also helps in quantifying things. It makes things a lot easier. Depending on how people have, past performance is a big predictor to how people will behave. And therefore, it does give you a sense in terms of using their motivators to nudge them into areas where they are most likely to respond favorably, right? So I think and plus we also mentioned this right in the beginning, right? Given the access to data processing infrastructure that's currently there, right? And it doesn't have to be structured. It can be, what you're saying on social media, it could be unstructured pieces of video, etc., that you have, right? So you also have the ability now to process all that data and come up with insights which might make sense and nudge people in a way which is aligned to their past behavior, right? So I definitely think that both the science as well as the art of of uh, of data prediction as well as data availability will help in driving behavior science-led interventions.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. That's a good insight that you've given in there. Happy to take any other questions that anyone else may have. Uday, you have anything else? That's all I have for Anand. So from my side, Anand's been a delightful conversation. I mean, I like some of the insights that you came up with, particularly in terms of saying what are the deterrents today to this whole implementation of digital. And I think you touched upon multiple facets of that, right? In particular, I'd say I like your human experience, because at the end of the day, it's a human being that gets touched by the tech. And like you said, right, variety of stakeholders, but for everyone, it's finally the human experience or the experience that they actually get, which will decide whether this works or doesn't work. And I thought that was a very, very, very good insight, because sometimes that kind of takes a backseat, because you're looking at how can you make it functionally good rather than how can you make the experience for the person really good in there. I thought that was a particularly good insight. So thanks a lot, Anand. From my side, that's all I have. As always, it's been a delight chatting up with you. So I'll hand it over to Uday.
Thanks. Anand, I mean, really quite insightful and very practical in terms of you really sharing, in terms of how such adoptions are like going to be very, very pertinent and useful, given the way we are like now so used to working remotely, right? And just to add to, I mean, we've been speaking about say the sales folks per se, right? But as today the whole organization is so integral in terms of whether it is the tech guys or the delivery folks or whatever, right? So do you think that such kind of nudges and tools would be also required and can be implemented for other functions as well apart from sales?
Oh, absolutely. I think nudges play a big role in the way we consume itself, right? There is so much research now which goes into understanding what cues trigger purchasing behavior and how you can manipulate some of. So the other day there was a very interesting example, right? So this is we were doing something for one of these food delivery apps, and what we saw was that the same product was available at a lower price when something else was paired free with it, right? And if you just look at the level, people normally what happens is you put something in your cart and then you take a long time, you change, right? So there is all of this indecision which happens when you buy a certain food product on a food app, right? But the minute you have a nudge like this, right, where you're counterintuitively getting two products which are cheaper than buying one of them alone, right? So when as soon as that happens, invariably you will convert, right? And therefore, I think nudges play a big role in conversion, in actual purchase, actual consumption itself, beyond just sales function. And then the other big thing is attrition, right? What we have been able to do is also to understand various different inputs, right? Depending on how often you take leave, to when you come into office, to when you leave, right? There could be a bunch of different triggers which are able, which people are able to understand. How long you take to respond to an email, right? There are various triggers which indicate that a person might actually leave your organization and go. And therefore, in human resources now, there's an extensive body of work where once you know that somebody is likely to leave, what could be some of the preemptive nudges that you give to the person and to their reporting bosses, right, to ensure that you retain the person, right? So I think that's another big area in human resources where nudges can make a big difference to retaining your workforce. Right. So similarly, suppliers, I mean, we can also talk about payment, for example, right? How do you ensure that you get your payments on time? When is it, at what time do you need to respond to the person who's going to be releasing your payment? And what kind of a of a mail should you send to him to make him act on it, right? All of this is a science now, and nudges play a role in all of these different aspects.
Thanks, Anand. I think
There's
we have,
another
if you
question which
don't
has come in.
mind, yeah, do we have a couple of more minutes? I think there's one more question, if you don't mind. I mean, just I would want to take up. Gaurav Kumar is asking, saying that most of the times orgs start chasing few good to have stuff, even without having basic building blocks in place. To give an example, D2C meta has become a buzzword and every org wants to chase the same. Should strategy not be to ingrain the tech digital as part of DNA with change management, upskilling infra and so on, and everything else that becomes a use case?
Oh,
Tell me.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. I totally agree with this that, I mean, foundation blocks are not there. And then there's the aspiration to build something very difficult to work, right? Because if, for example, I'll just give you a recent example of a jewelry firm, right? In jewelry, obviously, the customer is very important. And right. And therefore, you want to do everything to retain your customers and reach out to them very proactively and get them into the store. But if, for example, you haven't even classified your products properly, right? If because designs keep varying, right? So irrespective of what you do to your customer, if you don't have a product information management system or some kind of a digital asset management solution where the product information is stored, how will you really make use of all this customer data that you're collecting? What will you send to them and how will you be consistent, right? So I think there are some building blocks which are really critical. And what we say is you need to have one view of the customer, very important to know who your customer is. Then you need to have a view of sales. I mean, we had this big multinational consumer electronics company, but it really didn't know anything beyond its primaries or its sell-ins, right? Its sell-throughs, its sell-outs were all known to the distributor, but they themselves didn't know it, right? So very important to have that one view of sales, right? In terms of what is actually happening through sellouts or off takes, etc. And then there is the one view of product, right? If you don't have that one view of product and you don't have a clear understanding of what you're selling, again, becomes very difficult, right? So these are some of the foundation building blocks which are required to be in place before we go into building the superstructure. And yes, I mean, can't stress this enough, right? I mean, from the beginning, I've been saying technology is 10% of the job, 90% is adoption and getting people to adopt and use it, right? And therefore, change management is absolutely critical. And it's the single biggest enabler for any digital intervention to succeed.
Thanks, Anand. Yeah, I get that. I mean, what thoughts also came to my mind from your conversations, Anand, were that there's a specific kind of winning formula or strong suits every role needs to have, right? And I think nudges would actually play a lot of role to really, possibly keep giving those feelers. And because every person has got different winning formulae, right? But a specific role might require some formula or some set of formulae which are very critical, and so I personally believe really this was very insightful in terms of getting that clarity as to how these are very much pertinent and would continue to be adopted going forward. So thanks a lot for that. Anything, I mean, I had just few of the thoughts, last things in terms of about how you said data lakes and other data and analytics and all that as a prerequisite, right? And everyone is looking into it very critically so that all the solutions really get adopted, and so the digital transformation is all kind of conducive and integral to the whole part of the data and information ecosystem per se for an organization. I wanted to know, like, where would this, I mean, Ramesh, if you may want to, but where typically, the data resides on the cloud, where does the data get collected from in such kind of applications? I mean, that was something which I wanted to understand.
Yeah, so you want me to take that, Ramesh?
Yeah, you take it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so see, now the avenues exist. I mean, are all companies using cloud effectively? No, it is still an aspiration, right? But the opportunity exists to make all of this an OpEx, right? And to pay as you go, right? So why will you not choose this, right? It gives you access to data and you're going to only pay for the insights which you're going to use, right? And therefore, to that extent, I think cloud is very intuitive, and it is something which will penetrate a lot more than it currently is. And the data, see, even now, a lot of it, there's a lot of concerns, right? Because of privacy, because of data. I mean, people don't want to want it to leave the country, etc. So they still house it in their own company infrastructure, right? But I think this is an old mindset, and there are enough opportunities and avenues now available where all of these concerns can be taken off, and you can still use cloud, and you can do it in a very cost-effective way, right? So I just think that the willingness to experiment and adapt cloud to your business needs to happen. And therefore, data will eventually reside on the cloud, right? And it's not just your data. A lot of times partnerships help you understand the customer, right? And I'll just give you a simple example. This is within a firm itself. I mean, this is one company, but it has a jewelry business and it has two other businesses, right? Watches and something else, right? Which is eyewear. But they were unable to integrate between all of these, right? So the first step is to just have one view of the customer across multiple divisions of the company. Once you do that, that itself can be a big win for you. And therefore, to that extent, you can then understand how the consumer has bought jewelry, how is he buying watches, and where is he going and what is he doing on social media, and therefore have a better understanding of the customer, right? And therefore, these are some of the areas where cloud can really make a difference. And hopefully, we will see more and more data reside on the cloud going forward.
Got that. Thanks. So I'm sure, I mean, there would be prerequisites around, for such platforms as to where, what kind of CRM systems and, integrations which would be required, and, any prerequisites around that, in terms of what are the entry-level criteria for someone to adopt?
So like I said, one view of customer, right? So that's the CRM for you, right? Which gives a complete 360-degree view of the customer. And then one view of sales. So you need a good point of sales solution, right? Which tracks, and you need a good SFA or a DMS system, which will, I mean, if you are a company which sells through a channel network, then you'll get a good idea of your secondaries through that. There's a retailer app which you can use to understand offtakes, right? So that could be the other, which is one view of the customer again, in a sense. And then there is, like I said, that one view of product. If you're going to go to a marketplace or you're going to buy through a store, your product should look the same, right? It can't look different in different places, right? And therefore, one view of product. And beyond that, you need to have visibility on inventory. I mean, we are always talking about omni-channel, and we are talking about click and collect, where you select on one channel and you go buy on another channel, etc. Right? So to enable all of that, you need to know where your inventory lies, right? So you need to have a clear understanding. And that's again where your DMS can make a difference, where your store management system can make a difference. Do you have one view of inventory across both online and offline, and even within offline between your large format stores, MBOs and EBOs, right? So these are some of the foundation blocks on which the entire superstructure gets built.
Thanks. I mean, any one of you would like to just share? I mean, I have just a couple of questions which have come in. Like, share examples of, our customer stories on how productivity levels improved, using such tools or nudges,
Yeah, so perhaps Ramesh can answer that.
Yeah, I'll take that. So I'll probably start like Anand said, with an example rather than talk about the theory. But there's an interesting experiment that was done with one of the large customers. They have about 7,000 salespeople, and their theory was that for a salesperson, a month is a lifetime, because next month is a fresh target. You start from zero, where nobody looks at what you've done earlier. And they found, because it can be quite a stressful period, salespeople tend to start a little slowly during the beginning of a month. It's as if they're kind of taking a break from closing the previous month, and then they start a few days later. And if you think about it, if you start even a week late, you've effectively lost a quarter of the month, right, in terms of productivity. So that was the theory that they had. And we actually got a Stanford professor to work with us in terms of saying, these are people who are late starters. Can we get them to start early through nudging them? And so an experiment was done for a 3-month period where they were identified and their data benchmarked and so on. But interestingly, nudging them into starting early worked in terms of getting them started early. But more important, gave a 12% uplift in sales to that particular cohort of group. So you got a 12% benefit of actual numbers increase as a result of nudging. And if you think about it, it's even for us, it's logical. We all use fitness trackers, for example, right? What does it do? It actually nudges us to do what we are supposed or what we'd like to be doing. So that whole concept works extremely effectively, and there are numerous examples. But this is something that we've actually tested out with a few thousand people over a 3-month period and derived an actual benefit. So even Anand referred to behavior intervention. I believe that's a big part of it, because at the end of the day, all of us are human beings, and we have a rational side where we look at data analysis and so on. But we also have a strong emotional side, and it's that actually makes us act most days. So how do you trigger that in a productive way for the person itself concerned? I think can make a huge difference. So we've got numerous cases where we've seen a significant delta in performance as a result and the nudge does not force you or coerce you to do anything. It merely triggers you to do something that you anyway want to. It doesn't get you to do something you don't want, right? It's something you want to do, for whatever reasons you haven't, but at the right time, if you're kind of nudged or triggered, it does help you do it, which automatically leads to a result. So that's something quite interesting.
Yeah, as simple as that. I think that really simplified the whole understanding as to how nudges would be really critical and very so, and I would say assisting, towards your role. Great. I mean, we have discussed. I mean, Anand also stressed a lot. But would you like to share any examples around, say, consumer goods or CPG sector? I mean,
so this one actually, Uday, was at a large pharma company, which is similar to very consumer goods itself. In fact, even otherwise, we've looked at another large FMCG company, which actually Anand mentioned, saying, increasingly promoter-driven companies are more open, and this is a promoter-driven company. And is one of those you usually associate with being a very conservative, traditional company. The reality is very different. They're willing to try something out like this. And so again, we've used the concept of nudges to get salespeople to up their activity on two things. Number one is the journey cycle, and second is selling a certain set of new products that they'd launched. And over a 3-month period, we found something like an 18% improvement in performance on this, just out of nudging. Now, this is of course digital nudging, right? They have an application and then it kind of tells them what to do or nudges them into doing it. But there was an 18% delta in terms of performance of these two. And this is out of kind of industries or companies that you'd associate with being old world, right? That don't look at something new. But that's where it works, because they're willing to try out something that's completely different. And they got an 18% delta as a result of doing this. So there are numerous examples of this. I mean, I'm at least over a period come to this firm belief that if we are able to intervene positively, right, by nudging people behaviorally, it can make a huge difference to all of us. And this holds not just in our professional, but in our personal lives as
well. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think we're almost coming to the close, but just, as a last point, I just wanted to check two things. One is that, obviously there's always a concern around, say, how do you ensure privacy of employees, is maintained. That is one. And also, last thing before we close, Anand and Ramesh, any recommendations on books or any reading material you may want to suggest around the behavior side and all that. Two things. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take care. So privacy is obviously a significant concern, right? So one of the things that we also do is the messages or the nudges that go up private to that individual. It doesn't get shared with anybody else in the organization. And that ensures, so in some sense, it's like a personal coach, if you want to call it, for us, right? I would actually recommend a few very interesting books for those who are interested in this area. There is Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's a fascinating insight into how all of us, or to what extent do we behave rationally or irrationally. Another interesting book is actually called Nudge by Richard Thaler. And Thaler was a student of Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. These are two interesting books to start. There are many other fascinating authors, and they have a YouTube presence as well, like Dan Ariely, for instance. He's got some fascinating experiments he's conducted around human behavior. And he's got some lectures on YouTube as well. And he's written a bunch of books also. So all of these, if you read, it's sort of general interest. But when you read that, I think you begin to realize to what extent does this whole field, which is relatively unexplored, have an impact on us in our professional lives. And I'm talking of a positive impact for us.
Thanks so much. Thank you very much, Ramesh, for giving those references. Anand and Ramesh, really appreciate. This was an awesome session. I mean, I personally believe that this is so pertinent. I mean, every alternate, customer or I mean, whether it is at a CXO level or any business function or whatever, and also the say the chief digital officers or people who are involved into innovation. I mean, customer experience and customer side is very prominent, right, in the discussions. So today, I personally feel this topic would have really triggered a lot of thoughts amongst the audience. And thanks a lot for sharing candidly about your experience. And so that was really a nice session. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks a ton, Uday. Thanks for organizing this. And Anand, at least from my side, thank you very much. A fascinating conversation I had, and very insightful at least. And as always, a delight to catch up with you again.
Likewise, Ramesh, thanks for having me, and thanks a lot for Uday for hosting me.
And thanks to all the participants for being through and for some of the questions that came up. Very interesting questions. So thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good day.
Bye.